Are you the kind of person who sits through a movie totally straight-faced? Or do you feel every emotion along with all the characters? I mean, like when Mufasa died, right? It was a big deal emotionally for most of us, am I right?
I'm not crying, you're crying. I'm not crying, you're crying.
And when Marlin and Dory finally found Nemo, I mean, you gotta admit, that put you in your feels in the best possible way.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming.
And while emotion is a big part of the movie watching experience, it's actually a pretty big part of life in general. I mean, feelings are behind most of the things that we do. Just think about your regular week at school. On Monday, you feel annoyed because it's Monday. But your friend shows you a really funny video that day at lunch, and that sort of turns into joy, and that joy starts to turn your day around a little bit. But then on Wednesday, you feel anxiety because of a test that day. On Thursday, you get your test back and you got a 93, so now you feel comfort. And then on Friday, you feel excited because it's Friday. And then by Sunday, you feel dread because Monday is coming. So feelings are so foundational to our lives. It matters that we navigate them well. So what do we do when we're angry? How do we handle anxiety? What role should joy play in our day-to-day routine? Emotions affect everything we do, so the way we handle them is important. But the problem is, most of us in the room aren't very good at navigating our emotions. I mean, most of the time we think our feelings are either a goad or a guide. And here's what I mean by that. If we see our feelings as a goad, then we're running from them, right? A goad is a tool used by cattle farmers, and it's kind of got a sharp point on the end of it. And anyways, it's about 3 feet long, so they can stand behind the animal and the farmer can give it a quick poke in the direction that they want it to go. Just enough pain to be uncomfortable and to get the animal to move.
Oh, that seems mean.
Yeah, well, our feelings can be that way. We see our feelings as a painful stick, threatening to poke us, and so we run from them. For example, when you lock yourself in your room because your parents are arguing, you're usually running from your feelings. When your small group leader asks later that week, how's everyone's week? And you just say, it was good, instead of opening up about what really happened, you're usually running from your feelings. But some of us don't see our feelings as a goad that we run from though, right? Some of us see our feelings as a guide. Right? We think our feelings determine who we really are, so we let them lead us wherever they want to go. When you blindly rage at people who offend you, you're allowing your feelings to be your guide. When you make unwise decisions just because they make you happy, you're allowing your feelings to be your guide. Regardless of which category you fall into, whether you see your feelings as a goad or a guide, you're not living as the person God created you to be, because you're letting your feelings control you. Fortunately though, there is a better way. We're gonna talk about that better way today. We're headed to Philippians chapter 4, and the guy who wrote this part of the Bible, his name is Paul. And at this point in Paul's life, Paul is in prison. So long story short, he was a follower of Jesus, and certain people in charge didn't like that. I mean, there were lots more details, but that's basically how he ended up in prison. So Paul's received a gift from a church in a city called Philippi, and he's writing a letter from his prison cell to thank them for the gift and to encourage them in their faith. And what he writes is going to be really helpful for you and me as we try to figure out how to navigate our emotions better. Here's what Paul writes in Philippians 4:4-7. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice.
Hold up.
Now, there's so much more to this set of verses that I want to get to, but I do not want us to skip how huge it is that Paul says this. I mean, this man is in prison for doing nothing wrong. He's being fed food that is barely edible. He's locked in a dark, dirty cell all day, and he's isolated from everyone he's ever loved. I mean, you know your emotions pretty well, right? How would you feel if you were Paul? For some reason, Paul feels joy, rejoicing, and he feels it so strongly that he actually encourages others to feel the same. Oh, okay, cool. So Paul's a crazy person. I get it. No, I mean, that would make sense, right? Any normal human being in Paul's situation would feel depressed and maybe even a little bit hopeless. But for some reason, Paul feels joy. So either Paul is a lunatic, or clearly he's experiencing something the rest of us haven't experienced. He's clearly figured out some kind of secret to navigating his own emotions, and I think the rest of us would probably benefit from knowing what that secret is. Let's jump back in. Verse 5. Let your graciousness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. And don't worry about anything, But in everything, through prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Look, Paul had a lot he could have worried about in his current situation. I mean, like, what do you worry about? My next history test? How tryouts are gonna go? Whether or not my crush likes me? How mad my mom's gonna be when she sees my next report card? I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know who that character was. That's not a real person. Like in Paul's situation, Paul could have worried about when the guards would whip him next, right? He could have worried about whether he'd ever see his friends again. He could have worried about, when the next time he was gonna have freedom. And he did worry about those things at one point. But he moved past allowing his feelings to act as a goad or a guide when he brought his feelings to God. And here's what happened when Paul brought his feelings to God. We're in verse 7. And the peace of God, which surpasses every thought, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. When Paul brought his negative feelings to God, he discovered that his negative feelings were replaced with peace. Why? Because God's peace in Christ is stronger than any other feeling we can possibly have. It surpasses every thought, it surpasses every feeling. And I think this is something that we often forget about the gospel, that Jesus didn't just come to be our source of power over our sin problem, right? Jesus doesn't only care about our good and our bad deeds. Jesus cares about our feelings too. He came to be our source of power over our feelings problem too. Like in Christ, you don't have to run from your emotions or let them control you, because the same God who has power over our sin has power over our emotions. So that means that when Paul, accessing the relationship he had with God because of Christ, brought his feelings before God, God was able to turn his worry into peace, his loneliness into comfort, his depression into joy. Paul's feelings weren't a goad to him. He didn't run from them. And his feelings weren't a guide to him. They didn't control who he was. In Christ, Paul's feelings were a gauge. Now, a gauge is a measuring tool. We use gauges for air pressure in a tire. You can't just look at a tire and know the air pressure is low. You need a gauge to tell you that. The purpose of a gauge is to reveal the truth about something that's otherwise indecipherable. It shows us the truth of what's currently going on inside. And our feelings work the same way. They show us what's currently going on in our heart. And when Paul's emotional gauge told him that he needed his heart fixed, he took his feelings to the God who had the power to fix it. What has your emotional gauge been telling you lately? Like, what's going on in your heart? And how are your feelings affecting the way that you live? It's not evil for you to experience anxiety. It's not morally wrong for you to feel depressed. Anger is a normal human emotion. But the Jesus who displayed his power over all sin in his death and resurrection also has power over all emotions. And he opened up the pathway for you to have a relationship with God so that God can help you feel peace even when life is far from peaceful. When you see your feelings through the lens of the gospel, you won't run from them and they won't get to control you anymore. Because your feelings were never meant to be a goad, and your feelings were never meant to be a guide. They were meant to be a gauge. And the fix to your heart problem, to your feelings problem, is bringing your emotions to God and allowing him to give you his peace in Christ. Here's the point. When you see emotions through the lens of the gospel, you'll find peace in peaceless situations. And can you imagine what that's going to do for you? Can you imagine how much better life could be if you could feel peace even when life is hard? When Paul experienced peace in Christ, he passed it on in a letter to his friends so they could experience the same. Whose life could you influence for the better if you became a person who encouraged others to discover the peace that God gives through Christ? I get it, man. Navigating emotions is hard, and most of us are used to running from them or letting them control us. But I just think you'll discover that it's better for you and better for everyone around you if you give your feelings over to Christ and experience the peace that he can provide you, even in the midst of peaceful situations. And when you see through the lens of the gospel, that's exactly what you'll do.